Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Email Smarts, Optimizing Your Campaigns to Improve Response. We appreciate everyone joining us today. Before we start the program, I'll review a few housekeeping items. We're leaving time at the end for Q&A, but you're welcome to send your questions anytime simply by using the Questions tab on the control panel. Type your question into the chat box and click on the Send button. The question will open in my control panel, and I'll put it in the queue to answer later in the program. If you have any technical difficulties during this presentation, please use that same method to get my attention, and I will do my best to resolve the problem. We will also be providing you with a recording of the webinar and copy of the PowerPoint slides, so keep an eye on your inbox tomorrow for a link to those materials. And now let's get started. I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Emily Garner-Sumner from _Creative. Emily loves to work with clients to increase their brand recognition, leads, and marketing ROI. Lucky for her, she gets to do that every day as principal of _Creative. _Creative is a boutique marketing and advertising firm that specializes in marketing to schools and libraries. Since the early days of text-only email marketing, _Creative team has developed expertise in how targeting, design, content, and coding all work together to generate maximum response. From 2002 to 2009, Emily was Director of Marketing and Creative Services for Quality Education Data, where she launched and ran their Creative Services Department, an in-house marketing agency. Prior to focusing on education marketing, Emily held copywriting and account management positions at several North Carolina-based agencies working with clients in the banking, furniture, and agricultural sectors. Emily holds a Master's of Library and Information Science from Emporia State University. We are really looking forward to hearing what Emily has to share, so I will turn the program over to her. Thanks, Em.
Thank you, Suzanne. I'm really happy to be here today, and I'm excited to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is email marketing. So as we head into the back-to-school season, which we really are in the thick of now, like it or leave it, I know we're all looking for that one single thing that we can do to get our emails to generate more leads than our sales reps could possibly follow up with. Unfortunately, I'm still looking for that one magic thing to do myself. So in the meantime, what I'm going to do is share a lot of best practices and proven strategies to get your open and click rates up and to build those authentic relationships with educators that really do lead to sales. So here's a look at what we're going to cover today. And a lot of non-marketers, maybe some of your colleagues that are not in the marketing department, might look at an email message and think, how hard can that be to create? It's this simple little thing. And it is true that email is a lot easier to create and get out the door than something like a big, massive catalog or launching a website. But for those of you that work with email a lot, you know that there are a lot of pieces and parts and components that go into an email, and that each one of them really needs to be carefully executed and thought through so that the whole thing can work and perform as good as possible. So the goal today is to really walk through an email campaign from start to finish and touch on as many of those aspects within the campaign that we can that are going to really drive response. So let's get going. So we're going to start by just figuring out where we are with email marketing. And I'm sure, like me, you get lots of articles or hear from salespeople or have conversations about how social media is overtaking email marketing, that email marketing is dead, that the days of it being effective are gone. And while social media is extremely important as part of your marketing strategy, it definitely can't take the place of email. And these stats here on the screen kind of speak to both consumers and marketers' experiences with email. And one of the advantages that email has is that it just has a much broader reach than any social media channel at this point. And you can also personalize your emails in ways that you can't even begin to, even with targeted social media campaigns. With email, you can know that you are talking directly to a 9th grade science teacher in an urban district with a high ELL population. On social, you may be able to target science teachers, but more than likely you're not even going to be able to get that precise in your targeting, which also means you're not going to be able to get that precise in your messaging either. Another advantage that email has is that educators are connected to email throughout the day and throughout the year. We recently did a survey in conjunction with ShareID, which is a partner of Agile, and one of the questions we asked was how frequently educators checked their email throughout the summer. And every educator checked it at least once a week, So that's even classroom teachers who, unlike administrators, really are off for most of the summer. So educators are connected to email. During the school season, they're using it to communicate with their colleagues, their students, their parents, and obviously their friends and family. So while educators are definitely strong users of social media, the time that they spend on those social networks is a lot less than the time they spend looking at, interacting, and sending their own emails. But enough about social media. We're here to talk about email. And as I said, you can see from these stats that both marketers and consumers really value email. So specifically in the education space, you can see that educators really do turn to and rely on promotional emails to find out about new resources and information and things to help them in their jobs and careers. You'll also see that really impressive number of 66% of educators trusting email as a source of information about their jobs and careers. So that's a pretty important stat there. Not only are educators using it to search information, but they trust the information that they're getting from that channel. So the bottom line is here, as we dive into things, that email is still an effective marketing channel. So we want to look at now how to best use email. We've established that it's a hardworking marketing channel, but really what are the best jobs that it does? And the first one is lead generation. As we saw from that earlier stat, 89% of marketers use email for lead generation and feel that it's a strong channel to get those leads that they're looking for. So you can use email, obviously, to introduce educators to your business, to promote your products and services, but really these days, one of the best ways to use email is for distributing your content marketing programs. So you can really generate a lot of leads using things like infographics, ebooks, tip sheets, and just other content that educators value. You can send that out by email. You can get those clicks, which generate a nice warm lead for your sales team. You can get super hot leads by gating your content. So if you promote that infographic, link them to a landing page, and request that people fill out the form in order to access the content, then you've got a really hot lead for your salespeople. So that's using email to really drive that content marketing strategy. Agile has had several webinars on content marketing, and we certainly could talk all day about that. We're going to touch on it quite a bit here today because it is such a good complement with the email channel. Another way where email really gets results is when you're promoting different campaigns or events or things that are going on. So obviously using email to invite educators to your booth at a trade show or to attend a lunch and learn in their area or to register for a webinar or to schedule a demo. Those are all really clear action items that can be sent through email and can get educators' attention through that email channel. One thing that many people don't think about in terms of this whole promoting campaigns and events category is using email to really spread the word about events in your own company. So promote your new product features and functions. Maybe that's something you do more to your customers than to your prospects, but even to prospects, showing them that you are innovating, that you've got new things, that you're keeping up or outpacing the competition. That's interesting stuff that people want to know about. You don't want every email to be about you in that way. You want to balance it with that content marketing and providing something of value to the educators. But talking about yourself every now and again is important, and using email to get that information out is a really effective channel. Also sharing new districts that have joined your product family, new educators that are using the product that have purchased it and given you permission to promote that. Sending those out by email is great. Also promoting any awards or recognitions you've gotten. Again, you're trying to develop a personal relationship with these educators, but doing it in a mass way. And part of becoming friends with someone is sharing things about yourself and letting them know what's going on in your life. So again, balancing those messages that are all about the educator with messages that are about you can be a good mix for your email calendar. And then the third thing that email can really help us accomplish is customer engagement. And I think sometimes marketers tend to forget about customers as needing to be nurtured and paid attention to and treated in some ways like prospects. A lot of times we focus all of our marketing attention and efforts on those prospects, those people that don't know us, those people that aren't engaged with us, and trying to get those new leads. That's obviously a top priority, but nurturing your customers and ensuring those renewals and repeat purchases and upsells is also a great way to use email. We've all signed up for some cloud service. when you get that welcome email, and then you get an email a couple days later, how's it going? Here's a helpful tip on how to use it. So again, as we enter back to school season, sending those welcome back messages to your customers, refreshing their memories on how to use your product, letting them know about new features that might have been released at the end of last school year or over the summer, giving them valuable content or lesson ideas, ways to use your product. All of that is great stuff to send out by email. Also using email for customer surveys to get that pulse of how your customers are feeling about you and your product, getting ideas from them, getting feedback. Email is a great channel for sending surveys, whether to your customers or to your prospects. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, email can be one of those marketing channels that just seems really quick and easy to execute, and it certainly can be. We've all had those, you won a great award and you want to get it out the door and tell everybody about it that afternoon. And you can do that with email. You can put it together and get it out the door, and that's great, and there are times we want to do that. But overall, you want to really try to spend the time and put in the effort to think strategically about each step of the email process for that customer or prospect. So as we're heading into the Olympics, I'm going to use the track and field analogy here and talk about some of the hurdles we need to overcome to develop our email campaigns. So the first hurdle, as we're all well aware, is to get delivered, getting past server as well as inbox spam filters. Then once your email gets delivered and into that inbox, you need to get educators to open it. So it doesn't do much good if it just sits in the inbox and gets deleted. Once you've got that open, your next hurdle is to get people to read your message and engage with that content. But obviously that's not your final goal. Yes, you want that engagement, but you also want the action. And the action is the clicking on a link in the email. And then obviously the ultimate goal is a conversion. And in some cases that can mean an actual purchase. In other cases, the conversion for an email may be to download a white paper or request more information or watch a video or register for a webinar. So we are going to go through each of these hurdles, and again, I'm going to provide you with some best practices and tips and things you can do to improve your chances of getting over each hurdle throughout the course of the email process. But I'm not going to dive as deep into some areas, particularly sort of the design and coding areas, as was done in an earlier webinar, Agile webinar called The Art of Email Marketing. And the URL for that is on your screen. You can also find it on the Agile Education website, but that's another good resource that you might want to follow this webinar up with. Okay, so we're going to look at our first hurdle, which, as we said, was getting delivered. So this means getting past those spam filters. And unfortunately, spam is just a fact of life, and some of your emails are going to get caught in spam filters, and it does not matter what you do. So we all just need to come to terms with that to begin with and know that our goal is to get past as many spam filters and into as many inboxes as is possible. That's just the nature of the beast. Agile does a really great job of making sure that their email delivery service is CAN spam compliant and that their servers are whitelisted, and so that is giving you a really great chance from a technical standpoint of getting emails delivered and past those district filters. But we work with a district here in Colorado that just has a policy that no outside emails outside of their domain are delivered, period. It can be from your mother, it can be from your husband, it can be from your best friend. It's not getting delivered if it does not have that domain, the district domain. That's just the district policy. If you spend the time, you can work with their district technology officer to get your individual domain added to their whitelist. And we've been able to do that. But the point of that story really is that there are just districts who just have a blanket policy of no outside email. And so there's nothing Agile can do or you can do to get past that blockade. But for the bazillions of schools and districts that are out there that are going to let your email in, what we want to do is try to minimize our chances of getting caught in those spam filters, because even if they haven't put a total blockade on you, they definitely have a spam filter in place to keep junk email to a minimum. So just a little bit, and again, the earlier webinar goes into this a bit deeper, but just a little bit about how spam filters work. They work off a point system. So basically, every spam filter has a list of rules and evaluates your message based on those rules, and there's points assigned to each of those rules. Spam Assassin, and there's a little snippet of a Spam Assassin report here on the screen. Spam Assassin is one of the more popular open source filters that's used by businesses and schools alike. So their filter is kind of one we use as a rule of thumb to, you know, just across the board try to keep our messages as spam friendly as possible. Or spam unfriendly, not sure how you want to phrase that. But with Spam Assassin, a passing score is 5, but you want to try to keep that score to closer to 3, again, just to give it the best chance possible of being delivered. You're never going to get your spam score to 0. There are just built-in points against any message you send. Again, whether it was, you know, you sending a message individually to your mother, there's going to be spam points associated with it. So a couple spam triggers that you can really watch for and make sure you're not including in your messages. On the coding side of things, you want to make sure that you always have an HTML tag open at the top of your email and closed at the bottom of your email. And for those of you that aren't coders, that might not make any sense, but for people who are programming your emails, that will make total sense that you need to have that HTML tag. You can get a lot of points added to your spam score for not having good, clean code, which means you do not ever, ever, ever want to use code generated by Microsoft Word. You can generate a, you know, code from a Microsoft Word document and you think you're on your way, but it is really junky, horrible code that spam filters are going to pick up on and ding you for immediately. In that same vein, you want to make sure that all of the tags within your code, so you've got tags for paragraphs, for rows, for columns, for colors, for fonts. You want to make sure that all of those are closed within the code. The spam filters really scan that, can see it, and will give you a lot of points for it. You want to make sure your balance of image to text ratio is good, and by good meaning you have more text than you've got images, and that's really trying to prevent what a lot of spammers, as well as legitimate email marketers, do, which is send, you know, create and send just one big image or chop up a message into a lot of little images. So there's really not a lot of HTML text. So you want to make sure you've got slightly more HTML text than you do images. Avoid using bit.ly, owly, any of those tiny URL links. Those are flagged as a spam trigger. Avoid using all caps in the subject line. That's just one that has a lot of points attached to it. You also want to avoid using all caps too much throughout your message. You can use it a little bit, but don't have, you know, 6 headlines that are all in all caps. Same things with getting too excited. Don't use too many exclamation points. 1 or 2 is fine. 3 in a row, not a good idea. And to that end, again, because spam filters are working on a point system, it's not that you can't ever have an exclamation point, or you can't ever say free, or you can't ever have all caps. In fact, we're going to probably inherently have all caps. If you use, you know, an abbreviation for response to intervention, that's all caps. Common Core State Standards, CCSS, that's all caps. So it's not that you can't use those things. You just want to balance how many of those spam triggers you're using so that you, again, can get that lowest score possible. The URL on your screen is for a Spam Assassin page that lists all of their rules and the points associated with them. It can seem a little overwhelming, and there's a lot of really technical stuff on that page. But if you spend a little time looking at it, you can actually see where it's pointing out things like font sizes that are too big, you know, this open and closed tag issue, words to avoid, things like that. So that's a helpful URL to reference later on. So once you've gotten delivered, obviously the next step is to get your message opened. And the number one driver of that is your subject line. So with your subject line, you want to be as direct and easy to understand as possible. You don't want to be super mysterious. You know, lots of testing shows that questions can be very effective subject lines. So questions inherently have a little bit of mystery in them because you don't know the answer. But you don't want to be real cryptic. You want to be as direct as possible and not really think about your subject line as a headline. You know, in headlines for ads or brochures, we sometimes get real catchy and fun, which is great because when you look at an ad, then immediately the answer is supported there in the text and the visuals. But we don't have that luxury with subject lines. They pretty much stand alone. So tell people really why you're emailing them and what the benefit is to them. But you need to do that in 50 characters or less. Most mobile devices are going to cut your subject line off around 20 to 30 characters. So you want to make sure what's most important in your subject line, what's going to be most compelling and relevant to educators, is up front and first in your message, so that if it does get truncated, they still know what, why you're emailing them and what it's about. So I just said that subject lines didn't have the luxury of a lot of supporting material, and that isn't exactly true, because we do have what's called the preheader. The preheader is really something that's the effectiveness of it, or the usefulness of it, is really limited to mobile and webmail browsers. But it's that little bit of text. It's basically the first text in your message that gets pulled into, as you'll see here in this mobile snippet, that gets pulled here below the headline in webmail, in webmail for Gmail, to the right of your subject line. So in this mobile view, you can see that it's really helpful, because our subject line got truncated. We have our most important thing up front. We've got surveys results, and they're about educators. So that's pretty compelling. But here with the pre-header text, we get a little more information that might cause us to want to open that message, which is it's a new survey, and it reveals important information about educator purchasing. So that's going to get me to open that email. I've told you what it's about, and I'm interested, and so I want to open it. On desktop versions of your email, again, all we see is the subject line. The pre-header text shows up here as the first thing in the message. If you don't specify pre-header text, mobile devices and webmail are just going to pull roughly the first 100, 140 characters of your email. And why that can be a problem is if you use things like view in web browser, which is a good practice, that's going to be one of the first things in your message. So is that really the first thing you want people to see when they look here on a mobile device? Survey results inside educators, view in web browser. That information doesn't support the subject line and doesn't really drive people to open. So you've got that real estate, use it wisely to support that subject line, to give more information, and to drive those opens. Also with opens, your from and to text is really important. So try to use a person's name and email address for your from, rather than just a generic company name and info at company name. So in this example from Agile, the sales rep's name is there. So this is a message from Tony Ellsbury. Well, I know Tony, she's my sales rep. What does she have to share with me? I'm going to open that. That's a lot more compelling than just Agile Education Marketing there as the from line. Same with the to line. It depends on what email deployment system you're using, but making sure that your recipient's first and last name shows as the to in the address field. These techniques, making the from and the to really personal, help those bulk messages that you're sending really blend in with the personal messages in those email boxes, and are therefore much more likely to get opened. A personal example on that front is that I received an email from someone named Carol. Well, I know several Carols, and the subject line said my dad's birthday. So that seemed like a really personal and important message. And I opened it, and there was a picture of this Carol who didn't look familiar to me, but I had opened it and I was reading it, and it was a letter from Carol about her dad, and her dad had pancreatic cancer. And it turns out this was a solicitation email from a charity that I had given money to in the past. But it was a really effective example of using that personalization there in the from line and the subject line to get me to open and interact with that message. And I did actually give money from that solicitation, so it was one that worked. So after we've opened, we want to get read, as in my example about Carol's message. I went on to read that message. So looking at this little chart, which comes from IBM's 2016 Email Marketing Metrics Benchmark Study that just came out recently, you will see that people are not spending a lot of time with emails. They are not brochures. They're not even print ads where people will spend some time reading. The average amount of time you have to capture someone's attention is 3 to 5 seconds. And as you'll see here in the schools and education sector down here at the bottom, that sector is actually the highest percentage at 34% of folks who just glance at emails, which means that they're spending just 1 to 2 seconds with your emails. 43% of them are spending 8+ seconds, but when you set the timer, 8 seconds is still not long. So this means that you've got to be making it really, really easy for people to know why you're emailing them, why they should care that you're emailing them, what you want them to do, and what the benefit of them doing it is. And you've got very little time to make that happen. So that's where email design comes into play. We want to keep things simple, and this is just one example of many that you could use to structure an email that makes it really easy for those glancers and skimmers, so those people that are spending less than 7 seconds with your message, to know what you want them to do. So starting here at the top, what is this email about? And you should have already answered that somewhat in your subject line and pre-header, but what is this email about? And so we've got this nice clear headline, both visually and in terms of the content of it. It's short, it's bold, it's orange. I know what this is about. Voice over IP is changing the technology of text. Then I quickly, without having to think very hard, I know what AT&T wants me to do. They want me to download the brief. There's no mystery there. If I'm a reader or a really fast glancer and can do this in 7 seconds, I've got some supporting details here that are going to tell me a little more about the brief and why I should read it. But you'll see that this content is really chunked out. That's the word I used for it, meaning that it's not following proper writing rules, meaning that there aren't 3 sentences per paragraph. It's short little paragraphs. We've got some bullets here and more short paragraphs. And we close with another call to action, read the brief. So it's a reiteration of what I should do when I'm interacting with this message. Also from a design standpoint, it's simple. We've got some visuals here to support the message. We've obviously got the logo. There's the use of some color with the buttons and the headline there, but it's not overwhelming. My eye is immediately drawn to this top area, which is the most important. What is it about and what do you want me to do? And then again, I've got some nice text that's been personalized. I know who it's from. This is just visually a really easy, clean message to get through and to know what to do in just a few seconds of looking at it. So here's another example, and this is a difficult thing because more and more educators are opening emails on mobile devices. And on mobile devices, images are automatically displayed. And in most webmail systems, like a Gmail system, the images are automatically displayed. And when that happens, your message is beautiful, like here on the right. We've got this lovely illustration. We've got this massive 50% off, this Shop Now button. We've got some text. I've got a blog. It's beautiful. But if I'm the other 50% of educators who open this message on my desktop machine, this is what I see over here on the left. And that's not very compelling. There is good alt text here that shows me that I can say 50%, which is great, but it's pretty small. And this is just not visually appealing. And that's because the images on most desktop email systems are blocked. So the lesson here is that we can't rely on images to tell our story because there's going to be a high percentage of educators receiving them that aren't going to see them. So you want to just be smart about how you use messages or use images. On mobile, while this email was designed responsively so it resized for mobile, because of the way it resized, there was a lot of scrolling to have to get to the content that you want. So that's another thing you want to be careful about with images is even though they display on mobile nicely, you need to think about how much space they take up and therefore how much people have to scroll in order to see them. This slide right here is another example of an email that did use a big, nice image, but also used a lot of HTML text, which, as we talked about earlier, is better for your spam rankings. You're going to get fewer points because you've got more HTML text. But also, for the people who get this on their desktop machine, yes, the image is blocked, but I still see the headline because that's in HTML. I'm still even seeing color because that's also HTML. And my call to action button is HTML, so that's not blocked either. So even though the nice image of the teacher and the child is not shown and not supporting my message, I fully understand what this message is about and what I need to do. Unlike over here where I don't know where to click, I don't know exactly what's happening because those images are all blocked. Just a couple other things on design, and this is somewhat in the mobile arena. Keeping your body text between 13 and 14 pixels, and so your body text is this information here. Your headlines are obviously bigger. Headlines and subheads would be bigger. But keeping that body text at 13 to 14 pixels, so it's still a very easy to read size on a small screen, but it's not too horsey on a desktop. We've seen some emails where people will set the body text to like 18 pixels, and it's just huge and unpleasant on a desktop machine. It's great on a mobile device, but it's really unappealing on that desktop machine. So we're constantly today, because mobile hasn't completely overtaken the desktop email system, today we're having to just really always balance how things are going to look and be read on a desktop machine versus how they're going to look and be read on a mobile device. And another stat about that, and this is from a 2015 survey by LiveClicker and the Relevancy group, 32% of people said they don't engage with emails that are too small or hard to read, while another 21% cited that emails that are not formatted for mobile are a turnoff. So that Agile webinar I referenced earlier goes a lot deeper into responsive email design and your options there, and how to really make a mobile-friendly email. And one last thing before we move off from this mobile and desktop conversion, Agile for the past year has been tracking this mobile versus desktop opens. The green are desktop opens versus the purple, which is mobile. And while these mobile ones, in July spiked to 55%, we had some that were down in the 30s. So I would say we're hovering right around 50% of educators opening emails on mobile devices versus desktop. But because it's still 50%, we need to be cognizant of those desktop views. Okay, so we're still here on getting read. So my friends, like I'm sure your friends, send me a lot of articles and links to content that's about bicycling and cooking and books and all of the things that I really like. And when I get those emails, I know who they're from, so that's somebody I trust, and I know that they're probably going to send me something I'm interested in or that's going to make me laugh because they know me, and they send me things that matter. And that's really what we're trying to do with the people that we're emailing, whether those are customers or prospects. We want to become known as a company that they can trust and one that sends some useful information, good offers, and things that they care about, so that when they see that name in their inbox, they want to open it, they want to engage with that content. So relevance is really, the biggest key to getting your messages read. Yes, the design that guides someone to discover that relevance is really important, but making sure it's relevant is more important, because it does not matter how pretty your design is. If you don't have a good message, nobody's going to care. So from that same LiveClicker and Relevancy Group survey, 37% of respondents said that they don't engage with emails from companies because they aren't relevant to them. So the lesson in that is that we need to send messages that educators care about. And one way to do that is to align your messages with what's happening in the school year. Obviously, back to school is a big one. But there's lots of other things throughout the year to tie your messages in with, like Connected Educator Month, Digital Learning Day, Poetry Month. I mean, it depends on your product and who your audience is, but there are millions of events, and literally millions of events and holidays and all kinds of things, to connect your emails to that are going to be top of mind for educators and get them to open and read those messages. Also matching your marketing to the flow of the decision-making and purchasing cycle within K-12, which is very defined in terms of what they're doing seasonally in terms of researching products and budgeting for those products and then actually purchasing those products, as well as in their piloting those products. So, kind of aligning your messages with the types of information that people need at each stage of the buyer's journey is a good idea. And then we want to remember that educators are human. I started this slide with people send me things that are interesting to me or that might make me laugh on a day when I'm having a rough time. So it doesn't hurt to tie in some of your messages with quirky holidays like Hug Your Cat Day or Best Friends Day. And Best Friends Day happens to be coming up on August 15th, in case you want to know that. And Hug Your Cat Day was on June 4th. But, adding a little humanity into your messages is never a bad idea. You want to develop your brand tone and voice and make that as human as possible. So your brand may not align with Hug Your Cat Day, but you can probably find something that's going to humanize your brand and give you a way to talk to educators as real people and friends when you kind of start to think about all of the different points in the calendar that you can align your messages to. Relevance obviously points back to also our earlier discussion about content marketing. So the types of things that might be relevant to educators are things like infographics, tip sheets, worksheets, planning guides, videos, webinars. Their educators are hungry for resources and information to support their students and to support their own learning and careers. What we're looking at here on the slide is the results from a survey of educational leaders that Agile and PR with Panache conducted last year. And the question was around, when they receive marketing and information from vendors, what is it that they want to know? What is it that they're looking for? So we see things like key benefits and features, which is great. We're all inclined to talk about our key benefits and features. We just want to be careful and balance that out with not putting together an email that has 20 bullets about what we can do and nothing about how the product can be used and solve the problems that these educators have. Another thing that educators were looking for were examples of use in other districts, so things like those case studies or video testimonials, success stories. All of those things are great to send to educators and to achieve that relevance and that connection with them. So really the bottom line is think about what educators want to know, how you're going to solve their problems, and give them content that is going to interest them and have them continue to see you as a useful partner and source of information. Okay, once we've gotten that reading done and that engagement with our message done, we don't want educators to just close the email and move on with their day. We want them to click, because when they click, that's that warm lead. That's someone that spent enough time with our message and cared enough about what we were offering to take the time to click and move on to that next step. So reading should lead to clicking. That's what we want, which means that even at a glance, people, so that 1 to 2 seconds, need to know what you want them to do. And I think I've seen lots of emails, and I've attempted to write them myself, where we include tons of links because we have so much we want to share. We've got product information, we've got case studies, we've got worksheets, we've got testimonials, we've got all these things that we want to send people to. And so we'll put together emails that might have 5 or 6 different links. When really you need to keep your message focused, because if your message is focused, then your recipients are going to be focused on achieving that goal that you've set. So before you start writing or designing your emails, you want to sit down and make sure that you're really clear on what the one goal for the message is. And then you're going to write your call to action that clearly instructs the readers on how to achieve that goal. If you stay focused on that goal, then your email is going to stay focused and you're not going to end up with 6 different links in it. You want to make sure your calls to action stand out and are in the top quarter of the message so people can see them without scrolling to them. So in these examples, this is they're just snippets. I know you can't see the whole email, but this is an email header. This is an HTML button. So even if this image of this lovely teacher is blocked, the call to action is still going to be there. And it's really clear. Get login information. I'm going to click on this button and I'm going to get login information. Same here. This is a webinar invitation. Register now. It's there. It's big. It's blue. I know what you want me to do. In this case, the button is a little further down, which we might want to think about moving it up a little higher because, again, especially on mobile, you would definitely have to scroll to see that button. But that said, it's still in the top part of the message, and it's very clear. Get STEAM ideas. You're going to help me plan those STEAM lessons. And one thing just in terms of text links within a message, within the body of the message, try not to say click here. It is a spam trigger. It doesn't have a ton of points associated with it, but it is a spam trigger, so that's one reason to avoid doing it. But it's also not compelling. It doesn't answer why someone should click. What are they going to get? What's the benefit? Where are they going? Get info, register now, and get STEAM ideas. I know exactly why you want me to click. Click here. It's kind of a mystery. It could be scary. It could go somewhere I don't know. So try to really use that text both in your buttons and in your body copy. Use that link text to entice people to click and tell them why they should click. And then one last note about our buttons, our HTML buttons. Again, you want them HTML so that they show up when they're on a desktop machine so that they're not blocked as an image. And you also want to try to keep them around 44 pixels in terms of design size, because that is the average pixel size of a finger. So when we're talking about phones and fat fingers, clicking on this big blue button is a lot easier than clicking on this little link with my finger. So keep those buttons relatively big. And again, you're balancing usage on a mobile device with making it not look too horsey on your desktop machine. So this is sort of a typical structure of an email, and it includes 3 calls to action. And I would say on average you always want to include your call to action 2 to 3 times. And when I say that, I mean it's the same call to action. Not that you have 3 different call to actions, but that your call to action is the same in all 2 to 3 places and that the link goes to the same place. So you're going to ask or tell people what you want them to do. So in this case, take a look at this article. You're going to repeat that request, so download the article, and then you're going to ask it for it again, read the article. So that no matter where someone scrolls or reads in this message, they can see what you want them to do and you've given them access to do it. So, you know, if I don't have this link here, while this is not a long message, on mobile, I've scrolled pretty far to get to this point. Am I really going to scroll to the top to get back to that button? Maybe not. So that's why you want to reiterate that call to action so that if they've had to scroll, they still have immediate access to clicking. Or if they're just glancing in that 1 to 2 seconds, pretty much wherever their eye falls, there's a place to click. So repetition is a good thing in emails. So after we've gotten the click, conversion is the next thing. That's our final hurdle on our email journey. And again, conversion can mean different things depending on what the point of your email was, what your goal of the email was. It could mean filling out a form to access a white paper. It could mean scheduling a demo, or it could mean actually making that purchase. Obviously, ultimately, the goal of any marketing communication is to drive the sale. But as we know in the education space, converting to that actual sale can take a lot of time. It can take a lot of meetings and people involved. And so with your emails, you want to focus on getting the conversion at hand and knowing that that ultimately is going to drive conversion to the sale. So conversion is something that takes place after someone has left the inbox, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Again, we could do a whole other webinar on you know, optimizing your landing pages for conversion. But here's just a couple things that do relate to your email marketing. And that's to make sure your landing page content supports the promises made in the email. One thing we see a lot is people will have a link to a page, and it's a product page, but it doesn't look like the email, it doesn't sound like the email, it doesn't reference anything that people see in the email, and so they sort of feel like they're in this place that they didn't mean to end up, and they're not quite sure what to do. So you want to make sure your content and your design of your landing page matches the email that you're sending. You also, just like in your email, want to keep things simple and clear. So when people are they land on your landing page, they're not going to spend a ton of time on it. What do you want them to do? So these are landing page samples from 2 of the email campaigns we looked at earlier. So the one on the left is the AT&T one. It's not a gated piece of content, which is fine, but they've given me 2 opportunities, and both are really pretty clear to download that report. I don't have to think too hard. I can click. I can get that report that was promised to me in the email. Over here on the right was the one about grant proposals being rejected, and this is a gated piece of content, but there's not a lot of distractions on this at all. It's the headline that mirrors what was in the email. It's a little blurb about the article, and then it's got this ginormous form that I can just fill out real quick to get that article. So don't put too much distracting information or additional information on your landing pages, because you want to really drive them to what it is that conversion goal is. So as we're talking about conversion, I'm going to talk just briefly about lead nurturing. Again, there are a million things and hours worth of conversation to be had about lead nurturing. But it is a critical component of marketing, and particularly email marketing these days, because you're building that relationship with prospects or customers through your email, and you're guiding them through that decision-making and purchasing cycle. So, you know, more than likely a single email is not going to get someone to purchase. You know, the exception to that might be if you're selling classroom supplies like bulletin board decorations or workbooks. If you offer 25% off or free shipping or the launch of a new workbook series, you're probably going to get sales from a single email, and that's great. Those are transactional emails, and they're super. But For a lot of companies in the education space, the purchases are large, they take research, they take that collaborative decision making. It's a very long process, and so you need to lead people through that journey. And a lot of times all of that research, that thought, that discussion, that consideration all happens before anyone's ready to talk to a salesperson or schedule a demo. So when you think about your email campaigns, you really do need to think about them as a journey. So you're sending one email campaign, what next? You sent someone a really cool infographic. What then? What happens after that? They're not suddenly going to probably buy something because they read your infographic. So what's the next step? Is it to send them another email offering an additional piece of content, like a white paper or a case study? And then is there a third email after that invites them to a live webinar or to a product demo? What's that journey that you're guiding people through, and how are you nurturing them through it? I think it's really easy to get discouraged when we send out one email and we don't always see the kind of response that we want. But it's really important to remember that just because somebody doesn't respond to your first email doesn't mean that they're not eventually going to come to your party. That old marketing adage of 7 to 10 touches is really almost more true than ever, because there's just more clutter than ever that people have to get through, not just in their inboxes, but just in their daily lives. There's just so much competition for the attention of educators as well as consumers across channels. So you really have to think of your email campaigns as this marathon, not a sprint, to go back to our track and field analogy. It's going to take time, and you have to build that relationship, and you have to see results and response over time. So think really beyond that single email campaign into how you're moving people through that journey and on to the next step of it. So earlier, obviously, we talked about relevance, and relevance isn't just what you're sending to people, but it's also who you're talking to. Are they the right people with the right message? So even if you've got a product that crosses grade and curriculum boundaries, like a learning management system, so it can be used by everybody across the school district, from the district administrators down to the classroom teachers and students. All of those users are going to have different interests and concerns and things that are relevant to them about that product. So sending one message that's going to touch on the concerns of everybody is probably not going to be very effective, because you can't touch on everybody's individual concerns or interests in a single email. So we want to make sure that we're segmenting our email lists and our email messages so that we can make them as targeted and personal as possible. So that some ways we can do that within the education space are by roles and responsibilities. So that's a technology director versus a classroom teacher. Subjects or grades taught, math versus science, elementary versus secondary. Demographics such as high ELL populations, high Title I funding, and district size, and where educators are within the purchasing cycle. A good place to start with this is to create buyer personas. So who are your key buyers and influencers? What do they care most about? What are their unique challenges? What's their typical behavior when it comes to researching and purchasing? And what are the other individual things about them? And the process of creating buyer personas is going to humanize your targets. It's going to make them into those real people and those real friends, so you can talk to them in that real and authentic way. So you're going to move from becoming, having a big group of people, of unknown people, to making these people your friends. And once you know who you're talking to, you can create a message to Alice, the anxious administrator, that's going to have a call to action and content that's of real value to her and that really speaks to her, and that's going to get her to click and convert. So segmenting can make you a little crazy, because it does require creating a lot more messages and defining these audiences. You may not actually end up sending more volume of email in terms of like the number of people you touch, but the number of individual messages you send is going to increase. As we look here at Alice, Paula, and Todd on the screen, each of those people might need an individual message, even if it's all sent out on the same day. It's 3 different messages because you need to talk to those 3 different people differently. So my advice on segmenting is to start with those buyer personas, so you're really clear on who you're reaching, and also just to start small. So segment, you can think about it small or big. Segment in a big way, meaning just administrators versus teachers, instead of getting really granular, like superintendents versus district curriculum directors, Paula the principal versus her assistant principal. That starts to get really, really granular. So think in bigger buckets of people and start your segmentation that way. As you can see from this next slide, segmentation really is worth the time and effort because it does increase your response. So it increases open rates, it increases email relevance, it lowers opt-out and unsubscribes. It really accomplishes all of the things that we want, like lower spam complaints or even improved word of mouth. So taking the time to do the segmentation in terms of figuring out who your segments are and then creating those different messages is really worth the time. Another important thing to think about that is going to increase your response rates is personalization. So most consumers really understand that they're being mass marketed to, but we're all humans, and so we still respond positively to being addressed by our name and seeing things that are specific to ourselves, like a school name or grade taught. I'm from the South. That is the land of monogramming, so I love to see my name, I love to see my initials, I love to see things that are about me, and most human beings are the same. We want to be talked to as individuals. So personalization can really improve both your open and click rates. There are a lot of studies out there that show some pretty amazing lifts when you include someone's name or school name in the subject line. So it's a lot easier to personalize when you segment your emails because, again, you're talking to groups of people who have a lot of things in common. So if you're segmenting by grade bands, you can do things like including grade-appropriate photography. So we've got this high school photo versus this more elementary or middle school photo. If you're sending, one big email, then you can't really do that. You have to kind of pick a middle ground student and hope that it doesn't alienate anybody. When you're doing geographic targeting, you can personalize with information about a state or district initiative, like in this example where we've got both the school name, Washington Elementary School, and the Read to Succeed Act, which is an initiative in South Carolina. So also you can personalize by including some of those reference districts or accounts. People like to see that their neighboring districts or educators they know are using your product or have signed on as customers. And also don't overlook the more basic personalization, which is just in your use of pronouns. Your students love to get their hands dirty instead of just students love to get their hands dirty. Or you work hard instead of educators work hard. Use personal pronouns and speak directly to recipients like they're the friends you want them to be. So personalization can really go a long way in creating that authentic relationship with educators that we're looking for. And I know we're running out of time very rapidly. We're almost done. I'm going to quickly go over testing because we've talked a lot about different ideas here. And while they're all general best practices you can implement, the best thing to do is to test to see what works with your specific audience. So subject lines are one of the easiest things to test. Your creative remains consistent, so you only have to create one email message, but you test the subject line. So you can try including a person's name in a subject line and see if it gets you that big lift that others have gotten. You can try including offers in the subject line versus not, so save 25% versus special savings. There are just dozens and dozens of things you can test with subject lines, so that's a great place to start with testing. The number one question that we get is what's the best day and time to send the email, and the answer is it totally depends. But you can find that answer out for your target audience by testing the days and times of the week of when you send messages. And you might find that sending on a weekend morning is a great time to connect with administrators, but not a good time to connect with classroom teachers or librarians. So again, back to that segmentation, you need to test your different segments to see what appeals to them specifically. You can test graphics and images, buttons or no buttons, blue buttons or orange buttons. Does including an image of the product or the infographic increase your click rates? Does having an email header with your logo in it increase click rates? There's lots that you can test on the graphic and the layout design side of things. And then also on content. Is your audience, do they want a lot of content? Do they want a lot of those bullet points and chunked out paragraphs, or is it just short and sweet, headline, call to action, and they're on their way? And again, that might vary based on, which segment of your audience you're talking to. Here's a list of sort of the basic things that are tracked, I was going to go a little more in-depth in those, but again, we're running out of time, so I won't. But one of the nice things about Agile's analysis system, which probably a lot of you have used, is that you can do tracking based on a lot of really education-specific items that are shown here. So institution type, whether it's public or private, Title I funding, just lots of things that can, again, help you really figure out who your messages are resonating with. And to also help you segment. If you send a message and you look, oops, oh, I got a little crazy there with the clicking. And if you look in the analysis and you look at the job titles that responded, you might see that librarians responded in spades to your message, but principals really didn't. So right there you can see that you need to segment your list between librarians and principals and work on that message to the principals because they didn't respond to the one that the librarians did. So we've covered a lot today, and we didn't actually even get to quite as much as I had hoped. But in addition to the webinar I mentioned earlier, Agile has a new email best practices guide that's just a really awesome resource. It goes through every stage of the email campaign, and it provides even more in-depth tips and strategies than we've gone over today. This is a free guide, so just go out to the Agile website right now and download it if you haven't already. So Suzanne, I think we are ready for questions in the few minutes we have left.
Emily, thank you so much for sharing all of this information with us. It's been a lot to take in. And we have had several questions come in, but then as your presentation went on, a lot of them got answered. So I'm going to try to get to as many as I can in the last few minutes here. But I also wanted to remind everyone that we are going to send out a presentation or an email tomorrow that includes a link to view the recording of today's webinar and download the slides. It will also include the link to the email marketing playbook that's been referenced in our presentation. And again, if you guys haven't downloaded that, I highly recommend you do so. It's filled with just a ton of really great actionable information. So let's just take a few questions. Em, you had mentioned a spam assassin earlier in the presentation. Is that the spam checker that you would recommend, or are there others out there that?
So Spam Assassin is actually a spam filter, but they do provide a lot of information to help you stay out of spam. So that link was just to a list of the Spam Assassin rules and the points associated with them. If you do a Google search on free spam checker, you'll get quite a few links where you can copy and paste your HTML into it, and it will run a spam check for you. And most of those are actually using the Spam Assassin open source software. And then I think, Suzanne, you guys use Litmus and Email on Acid, which both have built-in spam checkers as well. So that's something Agile can help you with. And on the _creative side of things, when we design and program emails, we always run them through spam checkers before we hand them over to Agile for deployment.
Yeah, and a really great thing about Litmus and Email on Acid is the rendering reports that you can also see. So you can actually see how your code is going to look on someone's iPhone versus their desktop, which is also super useful.
Yes, we live and die by that.
Indeed. So you also had mentioned personalization. Do you recommend personalization in the subject line as well, or is that getting a little creepy, or is that something that, or have you seen it also lift response?
Yes. So and I get that whole creepy thing, and you do want to be careful about it, especially when you start to get into personalization with your customers, where you may have built-in tracking that shows how much you're using your product, or where they've gone on your website. So you want to be careful to balance personalization with creepy. But in terms of personalizing subject lines, yes, we've seen good results, including people's names in subject lines or school names. The school name can be a little tricky because some of them are really long. Thomas Jefferson Elementary School can take up more than your whole subject line. But yes, both of those have been effective techniques, and it's just really something to try and test with your own audience.
And we are still getting a few questions in. Do you recommend A/B testing every email that goes out, or more intermittently?
You know, in the perfect world, yes, I would say A/B test every single email. But I totally get that we don't always have time for that because you just got to get stuff out the door. So I think that, you know, again, in an ideal world, you've got your email calendar planned in advance, and maybe, you know, if you're sending out 4 emails a month, maybe try to have the goal of A/B testing 2 of them, and then you can use that learning for the other 2. So as with everything in life, just try to balance it. I think that you'll just make yourself crazy if you try to A/B test every single campaign, depending on the volume of campaigns that you send. But again, testing subject lines, that's a really easy one because you're not having to do separate creative. It gets a little more of a heavy lift when you're, you know, testing different versions of the actual HTML creative itself.
I think that is excellent advice. Marketing people definitely have enough on their plates without trying to test everything. And there are some more questions, but we will follow up with you guys individually to answer any unanswered questions. But I just wanted to wrap up, and thank you again, Emily, for joining us, and thank you to all who attended. When you log off from the webinar, you'll be prompted to answer a few questions. If you could just take a minute to provide your feedback on today's program, as well as provide any suggestions you have for future webinars, that would be greatly appreciated. Our next webinar is scheduled for August 25th. Doug Messakar, a former DOE employee and current Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for IO Education, will be with us for a deep dive into the impact of ESA on funding buckets and what it means for customers as they head toward full implementation of ESA during the next school year. So keep an eye on your inbox for details on this next webinar. And again, I'm sorry we ran a little late, but thank you all for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.